Hello everybody, my name is Grady Donahue and we're here at Boca Ciega Millennium Park. We're going to be talking a little bit about maritime and coastal forests. And right here we located in a sea of white mangroves. We found a single red mangrove is the common name. The genus is a Rhizophora, and the full name is Rhizophora mangle. So red mangroves are native to Florida. They're located pretty much all the way along the coast, from central Florida south. Basically, the limiting factor for mangroves is the climate. So they're not very cold tolerant. They really enjoy the warmer weather. But moving on, they are also an angiosperm, which basically means they are a flowering plant. They're also a dicot, which means they have two cotyledons. I'm sure I butchered that, but they are very salt tolerant, but they can also grow in brackish or freshwater. One of the distinguishing factors between some of the white mangroves you see out here and that red mangrove is the red mangrove has aerial roots. The white mangroves do not have aerial roots. And they all produce a fruit, which is also called a propagule. And basically what happens is they will germinate the propagule on the plant, and when it falls, it's ready to basically grow a new tree. It's basically a seed, or it's more of a fruit. But so the mangroves also like very saline soils. They typically grow along the salt water, but they also will grow in freshwater as well. They're adapted really well to the salt because they basically red mangroves exclude salt through the roots. So the root systems will filter out the salt, and a white mangrove actually excretes salt. So what happens is that through the glands of the leaves, the white mangrove will release salt through the leaves, and then the leaves turn yellow and they fall off. The red mangrove also has leaves that turn yellow and fall off, but they filter out like almost entirely all of the salt from the water, basically through the root system. Mangroves can grow 75 feet tall, even over 100 feet in certain areas. I can talk a little bit about the bark and the leaves. The bark is typically a brown to grayish color, and that's universal to almost all mangroves. The leaves are simple and they're opposite. They typically have very thick leaves, and that's due to the excretion process. They typically are a dark green on the top, and then a lighter green on the bottom, and then, like I said before, the leaves turn yellow when they are excreting that salt. They also form prop roots from the ground, so you'll see a lot of small little stick-looking things coming out of the ground. Those are prop roots. Those are the ones that are doing the filtering for the red mangroves. Let's see here. The seeds are viviparous. So this is what I mentioned earlier, that the propagules, or the fruit, is germinated on the tree. And then, like I mentioned earlier, they fall off and then they're ready to grow. So they don't actually germinate off the tree, they would germinate on the tree. That makes them viviparous. They are also an evergreen, so they stay green year round. And they don't like lose all their leaves certain times a year. They retain that color all the way through the year. Their population is decreasing, mainly due to human interaction. They are being torn out basically through development. So we're gonna move on to some other plants. So you can see over here that we have some pines that are also located in this type of community. You can find many live oaks in the overstory of maritime habitats. Also, eastern red cedar, which we were unable to locate, but they can be found pretty abundantly in these areas. And the soil can typically have large shell deposits, and is typically very rich in calcium. It's very sandy and quite saline. But maritime habitats also have well-draining soil, whereas coastal habitats have the opposite. They have very poorly draining soil. Typically in a coastal habitat where mangroves are formed, you would see very much standing water, very saline water. The area would typically be very marshy, and those mangroves are adapted really well to grow in oxygen poor areas and anaerobic soils. So continuing to move on, we see some live oaks over here, as well as an abundance of cabbage palms. This generally makes up the understory of this type of habitat. But there isn't much of an understory in this type of habitat. It's not a very thick understory like the overstory is with these live oaks really filling it in. Some other plants you might find here are Yupon holly, which is one of the only caffeinated plants in North America, interestingly enough. The wax myrtle is another one you might find. And then saw palmettos are also another plant you might find. Many of these trees in this type of community are very susceptible to fire. They're very quickly burning, and they don't do well around fire, but this is not a typical disturbance that they would run into. Some of the typical disturbances that plants in this area might run into are hurricanes, flooding, wind, the tidal changes. This all changes the salinity of the soil, which limits which plants can grow where. Another plant that you might find here is Australian pines. You can see them, there's a few around us, but those are invasive to this area. They've actually been planted here for the wood industry, and they're starting to invade the areas like this and outcompete native plants. I think that's everything I have to talk about today, but thanks for listening.